Hello, good people. Eber here with Hardware Canucks, and we have
Mike here again.
Yeah. So we just finished watching the AMD live stream, and this was based on their new RDNA 2 announcement. So AMD has three new graphics cards: the RX 6800 XT, the 6800, and the 6900 XT.
Yeah, and for us, these are AMD finally coming back to their super competitive roots. These are high-end GPUs. We haven't been pre-briefed, so these are really our first impressions right after watching the AMD live stream. So I think we're going to get to that right after a message from our sponsor.
Oh hi, I see Uni fans in your future. UNI fans. Uni fans. Introducing a really cool way to fans with Lian Li UniFan SL120. ARGB fans that daisy chain like no other with a seamless connection via the frame. They look fantastic with double-sided light show, available in black or white. And the best part, one cable, 4 fans with up to 16 fans total via the Uni Hub. The software is powerful and so are the PWM fans at 1900 RPM. The UniFan SL120 by Lian Li. Check it out below.
All right, so at the beginning of the presentation, AMD was talking about the performance improvement that they were able to deliver with RDNA 2. So for instance, it can deliver up to 50% better performance per watt compared to their previous generation, which was RDNA.
Yeah, and RDNA, if you remember that 5700 XT, that topped out at 10 billion transistors. Now they're stepping it up to 26.8 billion transistors on the 7nm manufacturing process. Just to give you an idea of how that compares to Ampere, the RTX 3080 actually has 28.3 billion transistors. So they're moving this closer and closer to what NVIDIA has, but also at potentially lower power.
All right, so about that RDNA 2 core, essentially AMD said that they've increased the power efficiency by 30%, and they've also increased the frequency by that same percentage amount, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. But they've also added a new feature called Infinity Cache.
Yeah, and I think we don't know much about it right now, the technical details behind it, but what it seems like is they're taking a page from the Zen 2 book. And what that means is putting a very large local cache that's going to increase and supplement the bandwidth of the GDDR6 that's on the card itself. We're going to probably cover this a lot more in our review, but to me this is really exciting because you're able to get more bandwidth out of the card at a very similar power envelope. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about that 30% frequency increase too, because that is super important. It's allowing them to broaden their frequency spectrum, and that actually has led them to increase their overall performance generationally by 54%. So they're actually hitting above their mark exactly what they did with the Zen 2, the Zen 3. So AMD promises something,
But they deliver about that.
Exactly. So they used to under-promise, or actually they used to over-promise and under-deliver, but now it's...
The tables have turned.
Exactly. It's under-promising and over-delivering, and that's really good for any company.
They've also included some advanced features with RDNA 2, so that includes support for DirectX ray tracing and variable rate shading, AI mesh shaders, and of course the last thing is just sampler feedback, which, like I said, I'm just reading off the slides here.
So a lot of these are part and parcel of DX12 Ultimate. And DX12 Ultimate, this is something really important that AMD needed to bring to the table because, yes, NVIDIA's been talking about ray tracing for the last couple of years, but they actually were able to include ray tracing cores within their architecture. And now AMD is basically doing the exact same thing. They have not talked at all about how they're accomplishing this, what kind of feature sets they're going to support, but at the same time, this is bringing hardware accelerated ray tracing and all the other features within DX12 Ultimate to RDNA 2.
And that brings us to the very first GPU that AMD announced, which is the RX 6800 XT. And this is looking like a really sweet GPU. So it's meant to compete with the RTX 3080. And when you look at the specs, it's pretty good. I mean, it's got 72 compute units, above 2 GHz game clock, 2250 MHz base clock, boost clock, and then the Infinity Cache design is 128 megabytes. Now do keep in mind that all three GPUs, including the 6800 and the 6800 XT or 6900 XT, share the same Infinity Cache design, and they all feature the same video memory size, which is 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 instead of GDDR6X, that's on the 3080.
Yeah, and I think that Infinity Cache there is really meant to bridge the gap between the bandwidth offered by GDDR6X on the 3080 versus what the 6800 XT has. And you also have to remember that AMD is doing all of this at 25 watts less for the total graphics power, or the total board power, than the 3080. And another thing that is super important before we get to the performance of this thing is the price.
Yeah.
Yes, it's meant to compete with the 3080, but AMD is offering it for $50 less.
Yeah, so $649 or $650 versus $700 for the RTX 3080. But I don't know if anybody can find an RTX 3080 for that price point because of the entire fiasco regarding that GPU.
But I think that brings us to something that's super, super important too. And from a customer happiness standpoint, from a customer satisfaction standpoint, AMD needs to do what NVIDIA didn't do, and that's offer these cards at this price, but also have broad availability. And if that means they look into their crystal ball and they say, okay, look, we can't have what the demand would want by launch, that you push it back like NVIDIA did with the 3070. Because if AMD can hit what we're gonna see with performance, and they can hit with that price, and for the third thing, get it in customers' hands, they will win.
Yeah. Now, taking a look at these results that AMD did showcase, it looks very promising, guys. The RX 6800 XT does end up either matching or beating the RTX 3080, and I mean, I really can't wait to get my hands on this to do a complete analysis on it. Moving on to 1440p.
I think 1440p is really where the sweet spot is right now, because that's a lot of 1080p gamers. Yes, a lot will stay at 1080p, but a lot are also transitioning to slightly high resolution displays. And even there, you're seeing really comparable results to the 3080, but there's something I want to bring up in these charts. And right below that frames per second statement, you see best API. And if you drill down a little bit into the footnotes, what you're going to see is that these results are based off of the best result from the best API, DX11, DX12, or Vulkan, for each GPU. So what that might actually mean is that in some of these, so for example, what Doom Eternal, right? Doom Eternal might be operating on Vulkan for one and a different API for another result here. So that's the other thing that I noticed, is that AMD didn't actually list the NVIDIA frames per second, so it's a little bit harder to make direct comparisons with our own system over here. Also remember that these are done on the 5900X.
Now, we need to talk about rage mode, and as far as I'm concerned, it seems like it's this one button on the software where just you click on it and it overclocks the GPU and the CPU to, of course, give you better frame rates.
Now, this is really interesting because it goes towards what AMD has been pushing, which is their whole ecosystem being the best ecosystem for gaming and being the best ecosystem for gamers. That means Zen 3 and RDNA GPUs. And from what I understand with this is you can click one button within the Radeon settings and it will give you additional performance for both your CPU and your GPU without having to go into different pieces of software for each. Whether or not this will allow you to get substantial performance increases, well, AMD addressed that too in their performance slides.
So taking a look at that, like I said, you're getting up to 13% better performance compared to when you're running it in standard mode. Now, moving on to the 6800, and this is yet again another promising GPU. So if you look at the specs, it's got 60 compute units. The game clock is a little bit slower than the 6800 XT, but the boost clock is above 2 gigahertz. And like I said earlier, the rest of the design is essentially the same, except for the total board power design, which is 250 watts. And if you look at the price, it's $580. So that's $80 more than the RTX 3070.
But when it comes to performance, it seems like it's significantly more than the RTX 3070. And AMD did a little dig towards NVIDIA here. I don't know if you caught it, but they brought out exactly what Jensen said. He said the RTX 3070 will be better than the RTX 2080 Ti.
Right.
And at least in our testing, and from what we've seen most other people's testing, it isn't. So what AMD is saying here is that yes, definitely at 4K, this is better than the RTX 2080 Ti, period. Something else that you have to see on this slide is they benchmark this with the smart access memory enabled. And moving on to 1440p, we can see pretty much the same thing versus the RTX 2080 Ti. It's either better or a lot better across the spectrum.
And the last GPU that was announced by Lisa Su is the RX 6900 XT.
And this one is just like a poke in NVIDIA's eye.
Yeah, this is the flagship GPU that AMD has announced by far, and it looks very promising. So if you look at the specs, it comes with 80 compute units, The game clock and the boost clock is about the same as the 6800 XT. And yeah, the rest of the specs is basically the same, including the total board power design as well.
Yeah, and I think that total board power design really shows what AMD is doing here with their 7nm process, refining that to the point where we have a RTX 3090 competitor at supposedly 300 watts, right? But when we move on to the performance, we do see that it matches or beats that 3090, but we also have to look at that little fine print. So that's with Rage mode enabled and with Smart Access Memory enabled. So they're really pushing that ecosystem approach to achieve these numbers. But we also have to remember, great, they're showing it with Rage mode, but just looking at the slide in more detail, and even with those two items disabled, it's still a 3090 competitor at $500 less. And I think the most important thing here is AMD is gearing this towards gamers. It's not this flip-flop of it being either for creators or gamers. This is geared towards folks who want to play 4K high-resolution games.
Yeah. I really wish if they actually showcase some creative applications with these new GPUs, because that's one thing that they did miss from the presentation.
And I actually think that comment says a lot, because it also speaks to NVIDIA's ecosystem approach. They have things like broadcast voice, reflex, DLSS, ray tracing, and yes, AMD has ray tracing now. And for folks like us, they have that studio driver ecosystem. I'm really hoping that AMD can bring something similar and also offer features that NVIDIA has right now. And we've used a lot of these in our everyday process, especially RTX voice. So if AMD can bring not only the rasterization performance and the ray tracing performance and a heavy feature set, they can really have something on their hands right now. And I guess that leads us to our final thoughts about this whole presentation, right?
Yeah. I think these three GPUs are really exciting, and the price point, I think AMD definitely nailed it on the price point. When we look at the 6800 XT, the 6800 and the 6900 XT, they look very promising, and we just can't wait to get our hands on it and showcase our analysis. And of course, I think we'll do the same, like upgrade kind of CPU scaling things, just so people can get a rough idea on how much they can expect when they spend this kind of money, because it's not cheap, but it definitely is competitive.
Yeah, and I think from all of my years in this industry where I've seen AMD winning, and then starting to sort of go by the wayside where they, like I said before, they over-promised and under-delivered, seeing numbers like this really gives hope, because a lot of people saw NVIDIA running away with both pricing and performance, especially the last couple of generations. Now with AMD back in the game, just like they are on the CPU side, if they can deliver performance in unbiased reviews like we saw in their handpicked presentation slides, it's really going to be an interesting 2020 and 2021 if they can get that availability nailed. So I guess that's pretty much it.
That's it for us, guys. Let us know what you think about AMD's RDNA 2 announcement. Are you guys excited about these new GPUs? I'm pretty sure you guys are, because everyone's been looking forward to this. And I guess if you caught our RTX 3070 review, this is definitely going to change the market. So that's it for me.
And that's it for me.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.